Under the old yellow lights of the train station, everyone froze as the K9 suddenly lunged toward a little girl in a wheelchair. No one understood what was happening. They only saw her trembling, clutching a worn gray bag, tears sliding down her cheeks, without a sound. But as the dog barked itself hoarse and the officer knelt to check on her, a dark secret began to surface, one far more terrifying than anyone around her could have imagined. The afternoon trains were running late again, and Riverside Central Station sounded like it was trying to apologize for it. Loudspeakers crackled, calling out delays and new platforms in a tired voice that blended with the rumble of tracks and the low murmur of travelers. Suitcases rattled over the old tile floor. Coffee cups clinked on metal benches. People checked their watches, sighed, shifted their weight, and waited. Officer Mark Harris walked the main concourse with a practiced, steady pace, his boots quiet against the floor. On his left trotted Nova, his K9 partner, a lean Belgian Malinois with a sable coat and dark, thoughtful eyes. Her ears twitched with every sound, but her body stayed relaxed, tail down, movement smooth and controlled. People moved out of her way without thinking about it. She had that kind of presence. "Busy afternoon, girl," Mark murmured, giving the leash a light flick. Nova didn't bark or pull. She rarely did. In all the years they had worked together, Mark could count on one hand the times she had truly lost her composure, and every one of those times had turned out to be serious. That was why he liked working with her. She did not spook easily. She did not play games. They passed a row of plastic chairs along the wall, where a young mother bounced a fussy toddler on her knee, and an older man in a work jacket dozed with his chin on his chest. A teenage boy in headphones leaned against a pillar, nodding to a beat only he could hear. The smell of old coffee and wet coats hung in the air, mixed with the faint tang of metal and oil that always clung to train stations. "Attention passengers," the overhead voice droned. "Regional Line 23 to Miller's Falls is now arriving on Platform 3. Mark's eyes swept the crowd automatically, his mind in that half-alert, half-bored state that came with routine patrol. Check the corners, watch the bags left alone, look for the arguments that might turn into fights. Nova's claws clicked lightly beside him, perfectly in step. Then, without warning, her head snapped up. Her ears pricked forward, tight and sharp. The easy swing of her stride vanished, her whole body stiffened, muscles tightening under her coat like coiled springs. Mark felt the change through the leash before he fully saw it. "Nova?" he said quietly. She ignored him. Her nose lifted, drawing in the air. Then she turned her head, slowly at first, then with sudden certainty toward the far end of the concourse, near the bay windows, where the late light seeped in through streaks of rain. "Nova, heel," Mark ordered, his voice firm but calm. She took one step in that direction, then another. Then she lunged. The leash jerked hard enough to wrench his shoulder. People nearby jumped as Nova surged forward with a power that surprised even Mark. He tightened his grip, bracing his feet, but she was already dragging him into a jog, weaving through the flow of travelers like an arrow shot from a bow. "Hey, watch it!" someone yelped as they sidestepped. "Sorry," Mark called back automatically, his attention locked on Nova. "Nova, heel! I said heel!" She did not even flick an ear at his voice. She was heading straight toward a cluster of seats near the wide support column where a few passengers sat with their bags at their feet. As they got closer, the crowd seemed to part on its own. Mark saw her now. She couldn't have been more than 8. The little girl sat in a scuffed older wheelchair, its right wheel wrapped in faded tape that squeaked every time she shifted. A thin blanket covered her legs, tucked carefully under her small hands. Her brown hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, strands escaping to cling to her damp cheeks. In her lap, pressed tight against her stomach, sat a worn gray cloth bag with fraying handles. She wasn't talking. She wasn't doing much of anything, just sitting there, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on a spot on the floor. Tears slid down her face in a slow, steady line, like they had been falling for a long time. Nova locked onto her as if nothing else in the world existed. The dog closed the distance in seconds and exploded into a wall of sound. She barked, hard and sharp, right in front of the wheelchair. Not once, not twice. Over and over, rapid and insistent, the kind of bark that made the glass in the windows hum. She lunged toward the girl's feet, then toward the underside of the chair, claws scraping on the tile as she tried to get under it. Her tail was stiff, her hackles raised, eyes burning with a kind of frantic urgency Mark had rarely seen. The station froze. "What is that dog doing?" "She's going after that kid." "Somebody stop her." A woman a few seats away grabbed her own child and yanked him behind her, shielding him with her body. An older man dropped his newspaper, half rising from his seat. Several people snatched up their bags, putting distance between themselves and Nova. A phone came up, camera already rolling. "Nova, off," Mark barked, hauling back on the leash. She ignored him, nails scraping, teeth bared, still barking nonstop at the girl's legs, the underside of the chair, the gray bag wedged in her lap. Her nose darted, nose close to the blanket, then under the seat, then toward the bag, then back again, caught between all three like they were pieces of the same puzzle. "Hey!" A security guard in a navy jacket came hurrying over, keys jangling at his belt. His name tag read, "Jason," in peeling block letters. "Get that dog under control, officer! She's scaring everybody!" "I'm working on it," Mark shot back, planting his feet. He knew Nova. She did not act like this for nothing. The girl's small hands clutched the gray bag so hard, her knuckles turned white. Her shoulders shook, and her breath came in fast, shallow gasps. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't scream. She didn't shout for help. She just shook, silent, as the world clustered around her. "Sweetheart, are you hurt?" a woman whispered from nearby, half to herself, half to the air. "Somebody take that dog away from her," a man snapped. Mark forced himself to breathe slowly, to listen past the noise. Nova wasn't snapping at the girl. She wasn't lunging at her face or tearing at the blanket. Every bark was a warning, a desperate push, aimed at the chair, the legs under the blanket, and that bag held in a death grip. "Nova," he said more quietly now, trying a different tone. "What is it, girl?" For a heartbeat, Nova stopped barking. Her whole body trembled with focus. Her eyes flicked from the gray bag to the girl's legs, then finally up to the little girl's face. The girl lifted her head. Their eyes met, dog and child, in the middle of the clamor. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her chin quivered. The tears didn't stop, but something in her expression shifted. She didn't look at Nova like she was a monster. She looked at her like someone who had just seen a lifeline thrown out into deep water. For the briefest second, before the security guard's voice rose again and another angry shout cut across the air, the girl's gaze locked onto Nova's, and in that look there was something raw and startling, not fear, recognition, and under it, buried but unmistakable, a plea. The noise inside Riverside Station rose like steam from a boiling pot. Voices layered over one another, each more frantic than the last. People kept backing up, forming a widening ring around the little girl in the wheelchair and the dog that refused to stop barking at her feet. The sound bounced off the high ceiling and old brick walls, echoing through the concourse. "Officer, do something!" someone shouted. "She's scaring that poor child!" Mark tightened his grip on the leash, bracing his arm. Nova kept lunging toward the blanket over the girl's legs, then the underside of the seat, then the worn gray bag held tight against the child's stomach. Her barks weren't aggressive. They were desperate, urgent, like she was trying to shout over the crowd, to make someone understand. He tried again, voice dropping into that low, commanding tone Nova usually obeyed. "Nova, off. Now. Nothing. She didn't even blink at him. The little girl sat stiffly, shoulders shaking, her small fingers clamped so tight around the bag's handles that the fabric dug into her skin. Tears streamed from her eyes, but she stayed silent. Not a word, not a sob, just trembling, barely breathing. A raspy voice cut in. What in God's name is happening here? A middle-aged security guard with a belly that strained his uniform shirt pushed through the crowd. His name tag said Jason, and he wore the look of a man who'd already had too much chaos for one shift. He threw his arms out theatrically. "Back up! Everybody back up! Officer, control your dog!" "I'm trying," Mark said, jaw tight. "Well, try harder," Jason snapped. Before Mark could answer, a woman hurried up from behind the pillar, breathless and red-faced. She looked to be in her late 40s, frizzy hair stuffed under a rain hat, an oversized coat buttoned crookedly around her. She smelled of menthol ointment and cheap perfume. She rushed toward the little girl. "Anna!" the woman cried. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm here. I'm here now." Nova snarled and lunged between them, barking so sharply the woman stumbled backward. "What on earth is wrong with that mutt?" she gasped. Mark stepped between her and Nova. "Ma'am, who are you?" "I'm her aunt," she said immediately, clutching her coat. "Her guardian. We were heading home today. She's been through enough. You need to get your dog away from her," the crowd murmured approvingly. A few people nodded. Someone muttered, "Finally, someone who knows the kid." But Nova wasn't fooled. Every time the woman moved closer, the dog's entire body tensed. Her ears flattened, her tail stiffened, and the barking sharpened into a harsh warning. She positioned herself squarely between the woman and the girl. "That dog's dangerous," the woman cried. "No," Mark said, watching Nova's posture. "She's being protective." "Protective of who?" Jason barked. "The kid?" He pointed a finger. "Looks to me like she's terrorizing her." The little girl, Anna, still didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the woman who claimed to be her aunt. She kept her eyes on Nova, wide and glistening, as if all the noise were just a distant storm behind glass. "Sweetheart?" Mark tried gently. "Is this your aunt?" The woman answered before the girl could move. "Of course I am. She's frightened, can't you see?" Anna didn't nod, didn't shake her head, didn't blink. She lifted her hand instead, slow, hesitant, and tapped the side of her wheelchair. Once, twice, 3 times. Soft taps, barely audible over the crowd, but Nova reacted like someone had fired a gun. She barked sharply, nose pointed toward the gray bag again. Her body lowered, her claws scraped the floor. Her eyes shot to Mark with a plea he understood all too well. "Something's wrong," he murmured to himself. Jason scoffed. "What? She's tapping? She's scared? That's what happens when you let a dog go wild." But Mark had worked with silent signals before. Victims who couldn't speak. Children too afraid to verbalize what had happened to them. He knew that 3 taps wasn't random. 3 was a choice. He knelt down so he could meet Anna's eyes. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe. I'm right here. Nova's here too." She drew in a shaky breath. Her lips trembled. Her fingers tightened around the bag. She looked at Mark, then at Nova, then back at the bag. Another tap. 3 times again. Nova's bark echoed so loudly, a baby in the crowd started crying. Jason threw his hands up. "That's it. I'm calling the supervisor." "You do that," Mark said firmly, "and tell them I have a juvenile with possible distress signals." "Distress?" Jason snorted. "Officer, she's crying because your dog is—" "No," Mark cut in. "She was crying before Nova ever got near her." People around them quieted. They hadn't noticed that part. They'd only seen the barking, not the trembling hands, not the long, steady tears. The woman claiming to be her aunt stepped forward again. "Officer, we need to get her out of here. She has a medical condition. She can't handle this stress." Nova lunged so hard the leash snapped tight, and Mark had to plant both feet to keep control. The dog's growl dropped into a deep, guttural rumble aimed right at the woman's shoes. "That's enough!" Jason shouted. "I'm getting animal control involved. That dog's a danger." Mark's patience snapped. "Jason, back up." Something in his tone finally got through. The guard stopped talking. Mark turned to the woman. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your ID and hers." Her face tightened. "What? Why?" "Because that little girl hasn't confirmed who you are." "She can't speak well," the woman protested. "Then she can nod," Mark said simply. "She can shake her head, but she hasn't done either." The woman's eyes darted to Anna. Anna didn't move. Her small hand trembled on the bag. Her fingers curled inward. And for the first time since the commotion began, she lifted her chin just a little. Not toward her supposed aunt. Toward Mark. Toward Nova. And in that tiny movement, Mark's stomach dropped. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't confusion. It was a child realizing, for the first time in a long time, that someone might actually be listening. He straightened. "We're moving this inside," he said. "Now, away from the crowd." Jason sputtered. "Inside where?" "The station medical room." "The aunt too?" Mark looked at Nova, who kept staring at the woman with that tense, low growl vibrating in her chest. "No," he said. "She waits outside." The woman's face drained of color. Anna's didn't. Her shoulders eased, just barely. And Nova, for the first time since the whole nightmare began, stopped barking. Mark guided the wheelchair down the narrow corridor that led to the station's medical room, the rubber wheels squeaking every few feet. The noise from the concourse faded behind them, swallowed by the concrete hallway, until it was just the dull hum of fluorescent lights and the steady tap of Nova's claws on the floor. The echo thinned out. The world got quieter. Too quiet. Anna sat rigidly in her chair, shoulders tight, hands trembling over the gray cloth bag in her lap. Her breath came in shallow little pulls, not quite gasps, but close enough to make Mark keep glancing down at her, checking for any sign she might faint. Nova stayed glued to her right side, matching each roll of the wheelchair with small, deliberate steps. Behind them, the aunt, Carla, tried to follow, but Mark lifted a hand without even turning around. "Ma'am, you wait here. We'll talk when I'm ready." "You can't separate me from my niece," she protested. Nova's head snapped toward her with a growl so low it rumbled through the floor. Carla froze. Mark nodded once. "Exactly." He pushed open the door to the medical room with his foot. It was small, sterile, and quiet, the kind of room where even the air felt like it was holding its breath. A single cot sat along the left wall, a counter with cabinets along the right. In the corner stood a wooden chair and a small desk with a phone, paperwork, and a half-finished cup of instant coffee. "Why, Ta!" Linda hurried in behind them, her face soft with concern and a kind of steady warmth older nurses tended to have. "All right, sweetheart," she murmured as Mark rolled Anna near the cot. "We're just going to make sure you're safe. No one's here to scare you." Anna didn't look up. She clutched her bag tighter. Nova exhaled through her nose, a long, slow huff, and pressed her shoulder against the wheelchair's frame as if to anchor the child in place. Jason, the security guard, arrived at the door just in time for the slam of it, closing right in his face. "Hey, Officer Harris!" he barked from the hallway. "You can't lock me out of—" "There's a window," Mark said without turning. "Go use it." The muffled sound of Jason mumbling something unpleasant drifted away as he stomped back down the hall. The door clicked shut, snapped, locked, and just like that, the noise of the station was gone. No shouting parents, no outraged strangers, no echoing accusations. Only the hum of lights and the quiet breaths in the room. Mark crouched beside the wheelchair so he was eye level with Anna. He kept his voice low, steady, the way he spoke to victims after accidents and frightened kids who didn't know how to ask for help. "You're safe now, kiddo," he said. "Nobody's going to grab you. Nobody's going to take you anywhere until we understand what's going on." Anna's eyes flickered, darting from him to Nova, then to her lap. The motion was small enough most people might have missed it. Mark didn't. Linda stepped forward with gentle hands. "Sweetheart, can I check your legs? I won't touch anything that hurts." Anna hesitated. A full second pause. Then she gave the faintest, almost invisible nod. Linda knelt, lifting the edge of the blanket. The moment cold air touched the girl's legs, Nova stiffened, head dipping lower, eyes narrowing on the skin beneath the fabric. Linda sucked in a soft breath. "Her circulation is all wrong. Poor thing." Mark moved closer. Anna's legs were thin, too thin. The kind of thin that came from lack of movement, yes, but also from neglect, from being forced to sit too long, from being held in positions no child should be held in. There were faint yellowed bruises around the ankles, and older marks, some faded, some fresh, circling her calves like she'd worn restraints. Not hospital restraints, something rougher. "Linda," he murmured, "those look like placement bruises." Linda glanced up and lowered her voice. "They're not consistent with bed sores. They're too uniform." Nova let out a low, guttural whine, nudging the wheelchair as if urging Mark to see more. He swallowed. "Anna, does it hurt when someone touches your legs?" She didn't speak, but her hand tightened on the bag, then loosened, then tightened again. A pattern. Nova leaned in, nose brushing her fingers. The girl's face crumpled for a split second, fear, relief, exhaustion, then steadied again. Mark stood, turning to the door. "Linda, run a quick neurocheck if she lets you. I'm going to get information from the aunt." "No," Linda said gently. "Not yet." Mark frowned. "Why?" Linda nodded toward Anna. She was trembling again, but something had changed. She wasn't looking at her legs anymore. She wasn't looking at the nurse. She wasn't looking at the door. She was looking at Nova. Nova didn't bark this time, didn't growl, didn't make a sound. She just stared back at the child with those deep, steady eyes that seemed to hold more patience than any human in the building. Anna lifted her hand, slow and shaky. Her nails tapped the armrest. 1, 2, 3, the exact rhythm as before. Nova reacted instantly, pulling toward the bag with a sharp, decisive movement, her head lowering toward it, as if pointing. Mark leaned forward. "The bag?" he whispered. "Something in there?" Anna blinked, tears filling her eyes again. She tapped the armrest once more. 3 taps. Nova's bark shattered the silence like a gunshot. Linda startled. "Good Lord!" But Nova wasn't attacking. She planted herself between Anna and the door, barking toward the hallway, as if warning them not to let anyone in, as if telling them the danger wasn't in the room. It was outside. Mark leaned close to the child again. "Anna," he said softly, slowly, "if something in that bag is important, or dangerous, or not yours, I need you to tell me. You don't have to speak. Just tap once for no. Tap twice for yes." Anna looked at him, her chin trembling so violently he worried she'd choke on her own breath. She looked down at the bag. Her hand rose. Tap, tap, 2 taps. "Yes," Mark breathed. "There is something in the bag." He glanced at Linda, who only nodded once, her face pale. Mark sat back on his heels, steadying his voice. "Anna, is it scary?" 1 tap. "Is it valuable?" A pause, then 2 taps. Nova growled low in her throat, her gaze locked on the bag like it was glowing red. "Is it something someone gave you?" Mark asked. No taps. "Something someone forced on you?" Tap, tap. A shiver went through the small room. Even Linda stepped back. Mark swallowed hard. Okay, sweetheart. You did the right thing telling us. We're going to make sure you're safe now. I promise you that. Another tap. 3 this time. And that was when he realized the truth. 3 taps wasn't only yes. It wasn't only a signal. It was a cry for help. A specific one. A code. Nova barked again, sharp, urgent, slicing into Mark's thoughts. He stood slowly, one hand resting on Nova's back to steady her. Then he turned toward the bag in the girl's lap. "Linda," he said quietly, "we're going to open it." For a moment, nobody moved. The little medical room felt even smaller than before, as if the walls had crept in while they were talking. The overhead light hummed. Somewhere in the station above them, a train horn sounded, faint and distant, like it belonged to another world. Mark took a slow breath and nodded toward the gray bag in Anna's lap. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "I'm going to put on gloves and open this, all right? I won't throw anything away. I just need to see what's inside so I can help you." Anna's fingers clenched around the handles, her shoulders tightened, and her lower lip started to shake again. Nova stepped in closer, pressing her shoulder into the wheelchair frame and resting her nose on Anna's arm. The girl's eyes dropped to the dog. She swallowed hard. Then, very slowly, she loosened her grip. The bag shifted half an inch. It was all the permission he needed. Mark pulled on a pair of disposable gloves from the counter, the snap of the latex sounding sharper than it needed to in the quiet room. He eased the bag out of Anna's lap, careful not to jostle her legs. Nova followed it with her eyes, her body tense but quiet now, as if she understood they had finally started listening. The bag was older cloth, corners worn nearly white, one handle mended with crooked stitches. But when he opened it, the contents didn't match the humble outside at all. Right on top was money, not rolled bills stuffed in carelessly, but neat sealed envelopes, each one thick, each marked with a city and a date in black ink. Some he recognized immediately: Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Boston. Others were smaller towns he'd only ever heard in passing. Someone had organized this. Someone who traveled a lot, or at least moved money around like they did. Under the envelopes were folded papers. Lots of them. He pulled a stack out and laid them on the small metal tray beside the cot. Linda, standing at his shoulder, leaned in. "That's not from a hospital," she said quietly. They weren't. The first pages were glossy flyers, printed in full color. At the top was a shiny logo of a sunrise behind a child in a wheelchair, arms lifted toward the sky. Lightway Children's Foundation, the heading read. Help us give mobility back to little heroes. There were photographs, kids in wheelchairs, kids in hospital gowns, kids hooked up to IV poles. Each photo had a name and a short, heartbreaking story beneath it. Mark froze when he spotted a familiar shape. He looked closer. One of the girls on the flyer had brown hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a thin blanket over her lap, a small, lopsided smile that didn't reach her eyes. The caption read, "Meet Emily, brave fighter, age 9, paralyzed after a tragic fall." The photo looked like Anna, but the name wasn't Anna. Linda saw it too. "That's her," she whispered. "Same eyes, same scar on her left eyebrow." Mark set the flyer aside and picked up the next paper. This one was a photocopy of a hospital discharge form. Different hospital, different city. Another name, same date of birth, same photograph in the corner. "Sophie Miller," he read aloud, jaw tightening. "Paralysis following car accident. Requires ongoing care." He flipped to another and another. Different names, different hospitals, different injuries listed. Same child, same face, same birthday. His stomach twisted. Behind him, Nova's growl rolled through the room like distant thunder. "Dear God, Linda whispered. From the hallway, someone knocked on the door. Officer Harris? It was Jason, his voice muffled. My supervisor wants to know what in the world is going on in there. Tell him I'm in the middle of an investigation involving a minor, Mark called back, and that he'll have my full report when I have answers. Jason muttered something, but his footsteps retreated. Mark flipped another page. This one was a photocopy of an ID card, grainy, blown up too much. Same girl again, but this time her hair was shorter, combed differently, her cheeks a little fuller. Underneath, a different name. Lily Carson. Linda shook her head slowly. They've been changing her identity. Not just for fun, Mark said softly. For money? He reached deeper into the bag and felt something harder than paper, wrapped in a cloth handkerchief. He lifted it out and unfolded the fabric. A small external hard drive sat in his palm. Someone had written on a strip of tape stuck to the side, Lightway, Chuck, Q2 campaign. Campaign, he repeated under his breath, like this is marketing. Anna flinched at the sight of it, her fingers twisted in the blanket. Anna, he said quietly, are these people raising money using you? Using kids like you? She didn't tap this time. She lifted her eyes instead. They glistened, full of something old and tired and far too knowing for 8 years old. Then, after a long, heavy moment, she gave the tiniest nod. Mark turned to Linda, his voice rougher now. I need you to bag all of this as evidence. Chain of custody, everything. I also need someone who can take a quick look at the drive without corrupting anything. We're dealing with more than bad paperwork here. I'll call the city unit, she said. We keep a detective on call for this sort of thing. Family services, too. He nodded. Do it. As she reached for the phone on the desk, Mark stripped off the gloves, tossed them in the trash, and walked to the door. Nova followed, staying just a half step behind, as if she knew what was coming. He cracked the door open a few inches. Carla stood there, arms wrapped around herself, pacing in tight circles. When she saw him, her face shifted instantly into a mask of worried affection. Well? She demanded. Is she all right? You scared her half to death dragging her in here like that. I told you, she has anxiety. I need your identification, Mark said evenly. All of it. Driver's license. Any guardianship papers you claim to have for her. Any medical documents you carry for her. Color rose in her cheeks. Excuse me? You said you're her aunt, he said. If that's true, it won't be a problem. Her eyes flicked past him, trying to catch a glimpse of Anna, but Nova slid into the gap, head low, eyes locked on Carla's shoes. A low rumble started in her chest. Carla jerked back. You keep that thing away from me. Identification, Mark repeated. With a dramatic sigh, she dug into her purse and slapped a wallet into his hand. His fingers moved by habit, scanning name, address, expiration date. The license said Carla Hayes, local address, nothing screaming fake at first glance. Guardianship papers, he said. I don't carry those around, she scoffed. Who does? Anyone transporting a disabled child who isn't their parent, Mark said. Do you have a medical release? A custody order? Anything signed by a judge? Her mouth opened and closed. The hospital has everything. I saw the discharge paperwork you handed my nurse, he replied quietly. There were problems. She blinked too quickly. What kind of problems? Wrong doctor's signature, he said. Dates that don't match her wristband, and a child who's never once confirmed she knows you. Carla's eyes darted down the hall toward the concourse as if she were calculating how far she could run. Nova's growl deepened, her body lowering as if ready to spring. You're reading too much into this, Carla snapped. She's shy. She's been through trauma. Trauma, Mark cut in, doesn't usually come with 6 identities and a fundraising brochure. Carla's face went gray. You don't understand, she whispered. I'm not the one in charge. I'm just supposed to get her to the next stop. They told me it was for her good, that the foundation was paying for her care. I needed the money. Mark held up a hand. Stop. Her voice broke. I never laid a hand on her. I swear. I just signed where they told me to sign. Behind him in the room, he heard the faintest sound. Tap, tap, tap. Nova turned her head toward Anna's direction for a second, ears pricked, then looked back at Carla. Mark took a slow breath, then lifted his radio. Dispatch, this is Harris at Riverside Station, he said, the calm in his own voice surprising him. I need a detective from Major Crimes, a family services worker, and someone from Financial Crimes if you can swing it. Possible exploitation and fraud involving a disabled minor. Also request secure transport for a child and standby unit in case this turns into something bigger. Copy that, Harris, the dispatcher replied. Units en route. Do you need immediate backup? He looked at Carla, at the way her hands shook, at the way her eyes continued to flick down the hallway, not toward the child, but toward the chaos of the station. He looked at Nova, steady and unflinching at his side. Immediate backup would be wise, he said, and have someone start digging on an outfit called Lightweight Children's Foundation. My gut says this isn't their first stop. Understood. Officers are on the way. He clipped the radio back to his shoulder and met Carla's eyes one last time. You're going to sit on that bench right there, he said, pointing to a metal chair by the wall. And you're not going to move until a detective talks to you. If you try, she won't let you get far. He didn't have to say who she was. Nova's teeth showed just enough to make the point. Carla sank onto the chair, her shoulders collapsing in on themselves. Mark closed the door again, the latch clicking softly behind him. Inside, Anna was watching him. Not the bag, not the drive, not the stack of fake names and stolen stories. Him. He went back to her slowly, calming his own breathing as he walked. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, he told her quietly. You held on. You signaled. You let my partner find you. Nova stepped in beside her again, resting her chin gently on Anna's blanketed legs. For the first time, the girl's hand moved without shaking. It rose, hovered, then came down to rest, light as a feather, on top of Nova's head. No taps, no code, just touch. Mark felt something in his chest ease, just a fraction. From here on out, he said softly, more to himself than anyone else, we do the checking, not them. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the first crack in something much larger, waiting to break wide open. Mark set the gray cloth bag on the metal tray beside the cot, his hands steady, though a cold knot had begun forming deep in his stomach. Linda moved to his side again, silent now, her nurse's instincts sharpening the longer she looked at Anna's trembling shoulders. Nova stood close, almost touching the wheelchair, her body angled protectively toward the girl as though she were shielding her from a storm only she could smell. All right, Mark murmured, mostly to Nova but partly to himself. Let's see what had you barking your lungs out. The zipper on the bag was newer than the cloth, fresh stitching, unfrayed edges, replaced recently. The contrast bothered him. Someone had put work into keeping this old bag functional. Someone who needed it to look worn, unnoticed, ordinary. He opened it slowly. The first thing he saw wasn't money or documents. It was a child's sweater, pink, soft, much too small for Anna. Linda frowned. That's toddler-sized, she said, almost under her breath. Mark set it aside carefully. Beneath it was a folded blanket, tiny, patterned with faded cartoon bears. He unfolded it part way, scanning the inside. A name was stitched into the corner in uneven hand-sewn letters. Grace, he read. Age 2? 2? Linda whispered. Oh, dear God. Nova barked once, sharply. The sound bounced off the clinic walls, startling everyone even though they'd come to expect her warnings by now. Anna flinched but didn't cry. Instead, she looked at the blanket, and then at the door, as if she knew whose it was. Mark swallowed hard and reached back into the bag. Next came the envelopes, more of them than before. Thick, sealed, some with rubber bands around them. He pulled one open. Inside were stacks of receipts, hotel stays, bus tickets, donation slips, all tied to the Lightway Foundation. The dates were close together. Too close. These weren't records of a sick child traveling for treatment. These were business expenses. Under the envelopes, wrapped in another cloth, he found a small stack of laminated cards, medical IDs. Each one had a picture of a child in a wheelchair. Different names, different injuries, different addresses. But the same child appeared twice. Once as Emily Johnson, once as Sophie Lowe, and neither name was Anna. He laid the cards out on the tray. Linda exhaled shakily, covering her mouth with her hand. "This isn't a charity ring," she said. "This is identity rotation." Mark nodded grimly. "They're cycling these kids through different states, changing names, changing their conditions, claiming new benefits every time." "And she's one of them," Linda whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Anna was watching him again, watching every movement of his hands like each paper he touched might determine her fate. She gripped the armrest hard, her breath trembling. "Hey," he said gently, lowering himself to one knee beside her chair. "We're not here to hurt you. You did the right thing, letting us open it." Her eyes flicked down to the bag again, then up to him, then finally to Nova. The dog nudged her knee lightly, the softest encouragement. Then tap, tap, tap. "3 again," Linda said quietly. "Same signal." Mark nodded. 3 taps. Danger. Anna swallowed, nodding with her eyes. Nova whined, head turning toward the door. "Whatever's going on," Mark said slowly, "this isn't just about money. There are other kids involved. Kids they cycle through. Kids who get handed off like—" He broke off, jaw tensing. Linda lowered her voice. Do we check deeper in the bag?" He hesitated only a second before reaching in again. His fingers brushed the hard drive, the one labeled Q2 campaign, and next to it, tucked flat against the bottom of the bag, was a thin folder wrapped in wax paper. He pulled it out. A sticky note on top read, "District, may transfer. Do not lose." Inside were photos, not glossy marketing pictures. Polaroids, raw, unedited. Children in wheelchairs or on cots, some awake, some asleep. Some looking frightened, some looking too quiet for their age. Every picture had a code number and a city name written on the bottom border. "Lightway has been moving these kids around," Mark murmured, "and documenting it." Linda shivered. "They're sick. Whoever runs this is sick." He flipped another photo over and froze. Anna, ponytail shorter, clothes different, name written under the picture. Child 04, River Campaign. He showed her gently. "Anna, is this you?" She didn't look away. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent as ever. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. And then her small hand lifted, trembling so hard he almost reached out to steady it. She tapped her chest once, then pointed at a second photo. A boy about 5, asleep on a cot, a toy truck tucked under his arm. Her eyes filled. Tap, tap, tap. Nova barked sharply and stared at the door again, body stiffening as though she sensed something moving beyond it. Mark frowned. "She's pointing at the boy," Linda whispered. "Is she saying he's in danger too?" Before Mark could ask, someone knocked on the door. 2 sharp raps. Not Jason. Too firm. Too purposeful. "Officer Harris," a male voice called. Calm. Too calm. "This is station management. We need you to open the door." Nova's reaction was instant. A deep, vicious growl tore from her chest, louder and more dangerous than anything she'd done so far. The fur along her spine rose. She lunged toward the door, planting herself between Anna and whatever stood outside. Mark straightened. Linda took Anna's hand, and Anna, eyes wide, face pale, raised her trembling fingers again. Tap, tap, tap. Stronger this time, more urgent, like she knew exactly who was on the other side of that door, and she was begging Mark not to let him in. The knock came again. 2 stiff raps on the door, too controlled to belong to a panicked station worker. Nova planted her paws, shoulders tight, eyes locked on the narrow seam where the door met the frame. Every muscle in her lean body stood rigid, the way she did when she scented someone she recognized, not as a friend, but as a threat. "Officer Harris," the voice called, smoother this time. "We really must speak with you. It concerns the girl." Linda's fingers tightened around the handle of the metal tray. "That's not Jason," she whispered. "No," Mark murmured. "It's not." There was something about the tone, a calmness no normal person would have in a situation like this. No raised voice, no frustration, just steady pressure, as if the speaker expected the door to open simply because he asked. Mark stepped toward the door but didn't unlock it. "Identify yourself." A brief silence followed. Then, "I'm with Station Administration. My name is Paul Rowan. We were informed there was a medical emergency involving a child. We need to ensure proper protocols are being followed." Nova growled again, deeper, the kind of sound that vibrated against the floor tiles. Mark exchanged a glance with Linda. "Administration doesn't stick their nose in medical rooms," he said under his breath. Linda nodded. "And they never walk around alone, not during rush hour." Anna's hand shot out, grabbing the sleeve of Mark's uniform. Her eyes were wide, wider than before. She shook her head in tiny, terrified movements. Then, with a trembling hand, she tapped the wheelchair armrest. Tap, tap, tap. Nova barked hard enough to shake the vent cover on the wall. That was all the confirmation Mark needed. He stepped back from the door, gesturing for Linda to stay with Anna. The nurse moved instinctively behind the wheelchair, one protective hand resting on the child's shoulder. The voice outside pressed on, the veneer of politeness thinning. "Officer, please open this door. I've been informed you removed a minor from her guardian." "Her guardian is being interviewed," Mark replied. "You're not coming in." "I'm afraid that's not your choice." A pause, then the doorknob jiggled. Softly at first, then harder. Nova lunged, snarling, claws scraping against the tile as she slammed her front paws into the bottom of the door. "Back away now," Mark warned, raising his voice. No response. Only silence. The kind of silence a guilty man makes when weighing his next move. Mark motioned to Linda. She wheeled Anna farther back into the room, between the cot and the counter, positioning herself like a human barricade. The knock came again, louder, sharper. "Officer Harris," the voice said, now stripped of all courtesy. "Open the door." Not happening. More silence. Then footsteps. Not retreating. Multiplying. At least 2 more people joined him. Mark braced his legs. "They're not leaving," he muttered. "Who are they?" Linda whispered. The answer came from Anna, her tiny hand lifted. Then tapped the wheelchair armrest again. 1 tap, then 2, then 3. But this time the taps weren't a plea. They were a warning. Mark leaned close. "Sweetheart, is the man outside?" Tap, tap, tap. "Part of Lightway?" She shook her head. Mark blinked. "No?" She raised her hand and pointed toward the door, then tapped again. Tap, tap, tap. Her voice didn't work. He knew that now, but her eyes did the talking. The man outside wasn't part of Lightway. He was running it. A cold shiver worked down Mark's spine. He stepped back from the door, one hand dropping to Nova's collar. "We're not opening this," he called out, and backup is on the way. Silence. Then, somewhere down the hall, a small voice called out, a male voice, young, frightened. "Mr. Rowan, where are you taking us? My legs hurt." Linda gasped. "Is that a child?" Mark's pulse spiked. Another tiny voice followed, muffled by distance. "You said we were getting medicine?" Nova's ears shot forward. Mark stepped to the window overlooking the hallway. It was small, just a rectangular pane of glass at eye level, but enough to see out into the corridor. His stomach dropped. A man in a crisp charcoal vest and white dress shirt stood with two uniformed station workers. His hair neatly combed, posture impeccable, smile soft and warm, the kind of smile that earned trust. He held one hand on the shoulder of the little boy beside him. Beside the boy was a girl of about 7, limping, leaning heavily on her crutch. Both children wore identical lanyards. Lightweight travel patient pass. Linda pressed a hand to her chest. "My God." Mark exhaled slowly. "He's not trying to get in here to help her. He's trying to get her back," Linda whispered, "before she talks." Outside, Rowan looked toward the medical room door, calm as Sunday morning. He leaned down to the children and said something too quiet for Mark to hear. But whatever he said, both kids stiffened. Their faces weren't relaxed. Not trusting, not relieved, just afraid. Mark watched as Rowan glanced behind him, making sure no one else was paying attention, then ushered the children toward the far end of the hallway, away from the main concourse, toward the service areas. He wasn't retreating. He was hiding them. Nova whined sharply, pacing to the door, her nails clicking on the tile. Linda whispered, "We can't let him take those kids. They'll disappear before police get here." Mark grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Harris. Status on backup?" "5 minutes out," the dispatcher replied. "What's your situation?" "Escalating," he said. "Possibly armed suspect with minors." Rowan paused as if sensing he was being watched. He turned his head toward the window in the door. His eyes met Mark's, cold, calculating, threatening in a way he didn't need to raise a hand to express. He smiled. Then he pushed the two children through a service door and shut it behind them. Nova snarled, vibrating with fury. Mark didn't wait another second. "Linda, keep the door locked. Stay with Anna. I'll be back." Linda's face blanched. "Mark." He knelt by Nova. "Guard," he whispered. Nova's body lowered instantly, placing herself between the door and Anna, ears high, eyes sharp. She wouldn't let anyone through that door, including him, until Mark returned. He looked at Anna. "I'm coming back for you, and for those kids too." Her lips parted, breath shaky. Then she raised her hand. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't a warning this time. It was trust. Mark stood, grabbed the doorknob, and unlocked it. The hall was empty now, quiet except for the distant rumble of trains and the faint echo of children's voices, fading into the service tunnels. He stepped out, locked the medical room behind him, and went after them. Mark stepped into the corridor with the sharp, cold awareness of a man who had just crossed into a different kind of danger. The hallway was empty now, Rowan and the two children gone, swallowed by the service tunnels beneath Riverside Station. All that remained was the echo of their small, frightened voices and the quiet hum of fluorescent bulbs flickering overhead. He paused long enough to listen. There, faint, nearly lost under the distant clatter of trains, came the soft squeak of a service cart rolling across concrete. Not a normal squeak. A hurried one. Mark moved. He headed down the corridor at a jog, boots hitting the tile in a clipped rhythm. The air grew cooler as he approached the restricted access door Rowan had used. A faded sign hung crookedly beside it. Maintenance staff only. He pushed against it. Locked. Of course. He exhaled, took 2 steps back, and drove his shoulder into the metal near the handle. The lock snapped with a crack that echoed down the tunnel. Behind the door was a steep concrete stairwell leading down into the service level, a dim industrial maze of pipes, vents, backup generators, and echoing metal passageways. A draft of cold air rushed upward, carrying the smell of diesel and damp cement. Mark descended quickly, hand on the railing, radio clipped against his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Harris. Suspect is moving children through maintenance level. I'm in pursuit." "Copy, Harris. Units approaching the station now. ETA 2 minutes. 2 minutes could be forever down here. At the bottom of the stairs, the world spread into a long, low corridor lined with utility doors and exposed piping. A single strip light flickered overhead, its yellow glow stretching shadows across the concrete. Then, voices, not loud, small, unsteady. "Please, my leg hurts." It was the boy. Mark followed the sound, turning sharply into a wide-open storage bay. Carts cluttered the space. Stacks of cardboard boxes leaned against the walls, and the air vibrated with the rumble of machinery somewhere, deeper in the station. He scanned quickly, stepping around a pallet of broken signage. A small sound, barely a whimper, came from behind a half-closed maintenance cart. Mark moved toward it and gently pulled the cart back. A little boy sat on the concrete floor, propped against a rolled mat of electrical wiring, his left leg bound with gauze that was far too tight. His cheeks were streaked with tears and grime. Beside him, a girl with thin arms and tangled hair sat curled into herself, holding a single metal crutch. Both wore the same lightweight patient passes as before. When they saw Mark, the girl tightened her grip on the crutch, ready to swing it. Don't take us," she whispered, voice raw and scared. "Mr. Rowan said, if we scream, they'll—" "You're safe," Mark said softly, kneeling. "I'm here to get you out. I'm a police officer." The boy blinked. He said, "You'd put us back." "I won't," Mark said, voice steady as bedrock. "But I need you to tell me where he went." The girl shook her head so hard her ponytail whipped. "He said we were going on a trip, that we had to be quiet. He said we'd get in trouble if anyone saw us." Mark's tone softened. "You're not the ones in trouble. You hear me? Look at me." They did. "Do you know where he went?" The boy raised a shaky hand and pointed toward a dark passageway behind the storage crates. A metal door there was propped open with a toolbox. "He went that way," the boy whispered. "He said he had to prepare the room." Room. The word sat wrong in Mark's gut. "Okay," he said, rising. "I'm going after him. Don't move from here. Officers are coming right now. They'll take you upstairs." The girl clutched his sleeve. Is Anna with you?" His breath caught. "Yes," he said softly. "She's safe." The girl's eyes welled. That was enough for now. He pulled free and moved toward the metal door, hand on his holster. The passageway beyond grew even darker, lit only by thin emergency bulbs placed yards apart. A low hum of machines echoed from somewhere deeper in the tunnels. He followed it, turned left, then right. Then a scraping sound, a box falling, footsteps sprinting. Mark quickened his pace, weaving between towering rolling racks and crates draped in plastic sheeting. The path narrowed as he followed the noise. Then he found the room, a steel door half open. Light spilled out onto the floor. Inside was a makeshift staging area, cots lined against the walls, oxygen masks discarded on a rolling cart, piles of wheelchairs stacked like spare parts. A table sat in the middle of the room with a laptop open and running a slideshow. Lightweight presentations, staged photos, fabricated stories. A travel itinerary lay nearby, typed names, matching faces, and the next scheduled stops. Anna's face was on page 1. Mark felt fury rise hard and fast. something shifted behind him, a soft shuffle of shoes. He turned just as Rowan stepped out from the shadows of the hallway, smoothing his dress shirt like he had just returned from a pleasant stroll. "Oh," Rowan said, blinking with feigned surprise. "Officer Harris, you shouldn't be down here." Mark's jaw tightened. "Where are the rest of the kids?" Rowan smiled, too calm, too collected. "You've made a mistake. Those children were under my organization's care. We've done nothing but provide support for families who—" Mark held up a hand. "Save it." Rowan's polite smile hardened. "You're interfering with a federally approved medical—" "You're running a fraud ring," Mark snapped, "exploiting disabled children, changing their identities, and shuttling them state to state for fake donations." Rowan tilted his head. "And what proof do you have of such an accusation?" "Her," Mark said. Behind Rowan, faint but unmistakable, drifted the sound of small footsteps. 3 children stepped out from the hall behind him, drugged, groggy, scared. One gripping a wheelchair armrest like it was the only steady thing in the world. Rowan turned slightly, blocking them from Mark's view. "Officer," he said sharply, "let's remember your place." Mark's hand moved to his holster. "This ends now." Rowan laughed softly. "No, it really doesn't." He turned to the children. "Move." They didn't. They stared at Mark, at his uniform, at his outstretched hand, and for the first time they didn't obey Rowan's voice. Rowan's smile vanished. "I said—" "Don't," Mark warned. "Don't touch them." Rowan lunged. Mark drew. But before he could fire, a sound tore through the hallway, sharp, furious, unmistakable, a bark so loud it echoed off the pipes. Nova burst through the doorway like lightning, fur raised, eyes locked on Rowan. She slammed into him with the full force of her body, knocking him backward onto the concrete. Papers flew. The laptop skidded across the floor. Rowan scrambled, but Nova pinned him, her teeth bared inches from his face, snarling with a fury Mark had never seen from her. The children flinched but didn't scream. They watched. Frozen. Safe. Mark moved fast, cuffing Rowan's wrists while Nova kept him grounded. When the metal closed around Rowan's hands, something in the man's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand," he hissed. "This is bigger than me." "It always is," Mark said, hauling him to his feet. "But it ends with you." Sirens echoed from above, the backup finally arriving. Nova stepped back toward the children, ears softening, tail lowering. One of the kids reached a timid hand toward her fur. She let him touch her. Mark looked at the scared, exhausted faces around him and exhaled shakily. "Let's get you home," he said. "All of you." And for the first time since this nightmare began, hope flickered in the dim tunnel like a light finally finding its way through. The sun had dipped below the station canopy by the time Mark brought the children up from the service tunnels. Emergency lights spun quietly outside the loading dock, washing the concrete in soft red and blue flashes. Officers moved with calm urgency, guiding the rescued kids toward waiting medics. Paramedics checked pupils, wrapped blankets, whispered gentle reassurances. No shouting, no panic. Just steady hands doing steady work. Rowan was led out last, cuffed, his pristine shirt streaked with dust. The polite mask he'd worn earlier was gone now, replaced by a cold stare that didn't bother to hide what he really was. 2 detectives flanked him, reading him his rights. He kept his head high, refusing to look back at the children he'd used. Mark didn't give him the satisfaction of watching. He turned instead toward the doors leading back to the medical room. Nova trotted beside him, calmer now, her tail hanging low in patient rhythm. Her job wasn't done. Not until she saw Anna again. Inside the medical room, the air felt different, quieter somehow. The moment the door closed, Mark let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Anna was still where he left her, sitting in her wheelchair near the cot. Linda stood beside her, rubbing a gentle hand over the girl's shoulder. Anna looked up the second she heard steps in the hallway. Her eyes didn't go to Mark. They went to Nova. The change in her was instant. Her shoulders lifted, her back straightened, her breath steadied, as if the room finally had air again. Nova moved to her without hesitation, pressing her head against the girl's lap. Anna's fingers threaded weakly into the dog's fur. It was the first time she reached for someone without trembling. Mark crouched beside them. "We found the other kids," he said softly. "They're safe now, because of you." Anna's lower lip trembled, but this time not from fear. She looked down at Nova again, eyes shining in a way that made his chest tighten. "You did good," he whispered. "You really did." Linda wiped her eyes and stepped away to give them a moment. A knock sounded, gentler this time. A man in a navy suit stepped inside, badge clipped to his pocket. Detective Randall from Family Services. Behind him, a younger woman with a tablet and a calm smile entered. She introduced herself as Elise, a child protection specialist. Randall knelt carefully, keeping his distance. "Hi, Anna. My name's Randall. I'm here to help you get home, okay?" Anna didn't look at him at first. She looked to Nova, as if asking permission. Nova sat taller, ears up. Only then did Anna look back at the detective. "She trusts the dog," Mark said quietly. "She should," Randall replied. "The dog saved her life." He took a slow breath, softening his voice. "We've already identified your real information, sweetheart. The name on your hospital bracelet, Anna Dawson. That's the one that matches missing persons reports from 2 years ago. We've contacted your parents. They never stopped looking for you." Anna's breath caught. Her fingers froze on Nova's fur. Her eyes filled before she could blink them away. Linda stepped in, kneeling so she could face Anna directly. "Your mom and dad are on their way here right now. You're not being taken anywhere except home." Home. The word seemed to sink into the child like warmth sinking into cold skin. Mark felt something tighten in his chest again. Hope mixed with sorrow, mixed with an anger he'd been holding in for hours. A quiet moment settled over the room. Then Anna lifted her hand. No tapping this time. She reached toward Mark. He took her hand gently, feeling how small and fragile it was in his own. She swallowed, opened her mouth, and struggled for a moment, her voice thin and unused. Help." Mark leaned in, squeezing her hand lightly. "We're here. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Her eyes drifted down toward the gray bag sitting on the tray, the one holding all the lies. She pointed weakly and whispered again, "Help. Others." Linda covered her mouth with one hand. Randall closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. "We will," Mark said, and he meant it. "Because of you, we already are." Just then, another sound floated in from the hallway. Footsteps running, quick, unsteady, urgent. A woman's voice, trembling but sharp with hope, called down the corridor. "Anna! Anna!" Anna's eyes shot toward the door. Her breath stuttered. Tears poured anew, this time unrestrained, open, full of something bigger than fear. Hope. Linda pushed the door open, and a woman burst in, hair windblown, eyes swollen from crying, a hospital ID badge still clipped crookedly to her shirt. Behind her stood a man gripping the doorframe, chest heaving, his face pale with disbelief. They both froze at the sight of the girl in the wheelchair, and Anna didn't need anyone to tell her who they were. Her arms lifted, shaking from effort, reaching toward them. Her mother fell to her knees, gathering the child into her arms with a sob that shook the room. The father followed, holding both of them. They cried together, soft, broken sounds that were somehow more powerful than any scream. Nova sat beside them, ears lowered, watching with calm, loyal eyes. When Anna's mother finally pulled back just enough to see the dog, she touched Nova's head with trembling fingers. "You saved my baby," she whispered. "Thank you." Nova gave a small whine and nudged her hand gently. Mark stepped away, giving the family space. Linda wiped her cheeks again. Randall turned to Elise and murmured something about protective placement and long-term recovery plans. After a minute, Anna looked back at Mark and Nova. She reached out for both of them this time, one hand for Mark, one for the dog. Her voice, still tiny but stronger than before, whispered, "You're my angel." Nova pressed her forehead gently against Anna's palm, closing her eyes. Mark cleared his throat, blinking too fast. "She's a good partner," he said quietly. Anna shook her head weakly. "Not just her," she whispered. Mark's breath hitched. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then Nova stepped back, turned her head, and gave one soft final bark, gentle and light, not a warning, but an answer. A promise. Outside, sirens faded, voices quieted, and the night settled warm around Riverside Station. And in that small medical room, surrounded by the people who had finally found her, Anna Dawson leaned into her mother's arms, Nova curled at her feet, and Mark Harris stood watch, knowing this time the danger was gone. Hope, at long last, had taken its place. Nyalmi. Shambre, if this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments so I know you're here with us. And if you'd like more gentle but powerful K9 stories like this one, make sure to subscribe. I'll be right here waiting to tell you the next story.